Who ruled the world before there was a world to rule? Before the nations of men, before the first empires, before Adam himself ever took a breath, who was in charge? The story you know begins in a garden, with one man given dominion. But what if he wasn't the first? What if Adam was the successor to a lost, ancient dynasty? A line of kings so powerful, so brilliant, and so terrifying that their history had to be hidden from Genesis? Tonight, we investigate the ultimate cold case. We will ask the forbidden question: who were the Watchers before they fell? We only know them as villains, the fallen angels of Genesis 6, infamous for their lust and corruption. But you don't fall from the gutter. You fall from a great height, and the height from which the Watchers fell was a throne. This is the hidden truth of the angelic kings before Adam, the first regents of planet Earth. A truth preserved not in the Bible you have on your shelf, but in the censored books they tried to make you forget. We will uncover their forgotten reign, their cosmic crime, and their horrifying legacy. Prepare yourself, because you are about to meet the original rulers of this world, a dynasty of angelic kings before Adam. The claim is so staggering, it sounds like heresy. A fantasy pulled from the fringes of theology. But what if the first clues to this lost kingdom aren't in some forbidden scroll, but have been hiding in plain sight, in the very Bible you hold in your hands? Before we open the censored books, we must first examine the evidence the gatekeepers left behind. Our first piece of evidence comes from the oldest book in the biblical canon, the Book of Job. In chapter 38, God challenges Job from a whirlwind, reminding him of his limited perspective. In doing so, he declassifies a critical piece of the cosmic timeline. God asks, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth, while the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" This is a bombshell testimony. At the very moment of Earth's foundational creation, a celestial assembly was already present, celebrating. These sons of God, the Bene Ha-Elohim, were angelic beings who existed long before Adam. Their presence is not a theory, it is a scriptural fact. They were the original witnesses to creation. But were they just witnesses, or something more? For our second piece of evidence, we turn to the prophet Ezekiel. In chapter 28, he describes the original glory of Lucifer, a being who existed in a primordial Eden, the Garden of God. God describes his role with a specific title. "You were the anointed cherub who covers." The guardian cherub. This is the language of governance. A guardian is not a passive observer. A guardian holds a position of authority, of stewardship, of rule. This wasn't a low-level angel. This was a high-ranking official with a specific terrestrial jurisdiction. He was a ruler over a realm that existed before humanity. Finally, the Book of Daniel gives this class of celestial governors an official title. In chapter 4, King Nebuchadnezzar has a terrifying dream, and its meaning is delivered by a divine messenger. The judgment, the text says, is by the decree of the Watchers. The Bible itself names a specific order of angelic beings whose mandate involves observing and executing judgment upon the kingdoms of the earth. Let's assemble the evidence from the official record. Job proves their presence before mankind. Ezekiel establishes their authority and jurisdiction. And Daniel gives us their official title, the Watchers. The Bible doesn't describe an empty planet waiting for a gardener. It describes a governed realm, a cosmic province overseen by high-ranking angelic stewards. They were not just observers. They were the original administration, heaven's rulers. But the official record only gives us glimpses of their authorized power. To understand the full, terrifying scope of their reign and the crime that led to their fall, we must now turn to the eyewitness testimony that was hidden from Genesis. The Bible gives us the official titles: the sons of God, the guardian cherub, the Watchers. It confirms their existence, their authority, and their presence before Adam. But the official record is like a heavily redacted government file. The most crucial details have been blacked out. To read the uncensored report, to see the full, terrifying job description of these celestial beings, we must turn to the one document that bears the name of the man who walked among them and lived to tell the tale. We must now unseal Exhibit A in our investigation, the Book of Enoch. Immediately, a wall of controversy goes up. The question is inevitable: why isn't this book in my Bible? The answer is the very reason we are here tonight. For centuries, this text was considered scripture by many early Jewish and Christian communities. It was so highly regarded that the New Testament author, Jude, the very brother of James, quotes it directly as legitimate prophecy. But as the early church consolidated its power, it made a decision. Enoch's detailed cosmology, its unflinching descriptions of angelic hierarchies, celestial secrets, and the inner workings of heaven and hell, was deemed too complex, too mystical, and too dangerous for the simplified narrative they wanted to promote. And so, it was systematically suppressed. It was branded apocrypha, hidden away, and for nearly 2 millennia, it vanished from the Western world, preserved only by the faithful scribes of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. For our investigation, we are not treating Enoch as an alternative Bible. We are treating it as what it purports to be: the declassified eyewitness testimony of a prophet who was taken on a tour of the heavens. It is the missing intelligence report that fills in the gaps left by Genesis. While the Bible tells us the Watchers existed, Enoch tells us who they were. He describes a specific class of angels, a celestial order whose divine commission was to oversee and guide the fledgling human race. They were heaven's rulers on earth, the stewards of creation, the original administrators of this planet. They were not distant observers. They were hands-on governors, tasked with maintaining divine order in a new world. They were, in effect, the first kings of the earth. And for a time, they were holy, majestic, and true to their purpose. But Enoch's testimony does not end with their glory. It is, above all, the chronicle of their crime. The story of how these divine guardians became history's greatest traitors. The story of how their reign of light descended into a nightmare of darkness. Before the fall, there was the reign. Before the crime, there was the crown. To truly comprehend the magnitude of what was lost, we must, for a moment, erase the image of the fallen demons we know and reconstruct the glorious beings they once were. The Book of Enoch doesn't just describe their sin, it gives us glimpses of their original divine mandate. It allows us to piece together a portrait of the angelic kings before Adam's full commission, during the infancy of humanity. In this forgotten golden age, the Watchers were not tyrants. They were tutors. They were the celestial regents tasked with overseeing a young creation. Imagine a world where humanity's first teachers were angels, where the principles of agriculture, the understanding of seasons, and the very foundations of civilized life were taught not through trial and error, but through divine instruction. Enoch hints at a world of perfect order, a world where these mighty beings walked among men, their presence a constant reminder of the divine. They were the bridge between heaven and earth, the living conduits of God's wisdom and will. They maintained the balance, protected the fledgling human race from dangers both seen and unseen, and ensured that creation unfolded according to the divine blueprint. Their role was one of governance, not just observation. Think of them as the viceroys of a cosmic empire, ruling a remote but precious outpost, Earth, on behalf of the great king in the capital city of heaven. They were the original heaven's rulers, their authority absolute, their wisdom profound, and their appearance majestic. For an unknown span of time, this was the reality. A world under the benevolent and powerful reign of its angelic kings. This is the hidden truth that makes their fall so much more tragic and so much more sinister. They were not low-level angels who succumbed to a momentary temptation. They were high-ranking kings who orchestrated a deliberate coup. They didn't just stumble. They abdicated. They didn't just break a rule. They betrayed an entire kingdom. And the story of that betrayal begins not with a whisper of temptation, but with a calculated conspiratorial oath sworn on the peak of a mountain that would forever bear the scar of their treason. The Golden Age was not eternal. Authority, even when divine, carries with it the seed of pride. And proximity to humanity, with all its raw beauty and fragile mortality, bred a dangerous fascination. The Book of Enoch pinpoints the exact moment the reign of light began to curdle into a conspiracy of darkness. It did not begin with a single act of weakness. It began with a premeditated crime, a secret meeting, an oath of rebellion. The book names the location, the summit of Mount Hermon. The name Hermon itself, in Hebrew, is related to the word for curse. It was on this peak that 200 of the Watchers, the angelic kings of earth, gathered in secret. Their leader, a high-ranking angel named Semjaza, saw the lust in the eyes of his brothers. He saw their growing obsession with the daughters of men, but he also saw the danger. He knew the punishment for crossing the sacred boundary between the spiritual and the material would be absolute. He feared he would be the only one to commit this crime and would have to bear the weight of a great sin alone. So he proposed a pact, a conspiracy. Enoch records his words. "Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." This was not a fall. This was a calculated mutiny. This was a treasonous council of kings plotting to overthrow the very laws they were appointed to uphold. They swore an oath, binding their eternal fates together. If one fell, they all fell. They were no longer individual stewards of God's will. They were now a unified cabal, a brotherhood of rebellion, driven by a singular, forbidden purpose. From this moment on, they were no longer heaven's rulers. They were renegades. They descended from the mountain not as guardians, but as invaders. They came to the daughters of men not with divine wisdom, but with selfish lust. And the children born from this cursed union would not be princes of light. They would be monsters, the Nephilim, the horrifying evidence of a kingdom that had declared war on its creator. The crime on Mount Hermon was not just the beginning of their fall. It was the end of the world as it was meant to be. The pact on Mount Hermon unleashed more than just forbidden lust. It opened a Pandora's box of celestial knowledge that humanity was never meant to possess. The Watchers' crime was not merely biological, it was ideological. They didn't just corrupt humanity's bloodline, they corrupted its very mind and soul by downloading a curriculum of forbidden arts. The Book of Enoch doesn't speak in generalities. It provides a detailed indictment, a specific list of the secrets these fallen kings revealed, turning them from benevolent tutors into professors of damnation. It reads like a manifest of a deliberate, systematic campaign to accelerate human corruption. The chief of the Watchers, Azazel, is credited with teaching mankind the art of war. He taught men how to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He introduced them to metallurgy, showing them how to mine the earth and create weapons of destruction and ornaments of vanity. But his lessons were not just for men. Enoch explicitly states that Azazel also taught the women the arts of deception, the crafting of cosmetics, the coloring of the eyelids with kohl, and the use of enchantments to ensnare the hearts of men. Think of the profound implication of this. War and vanity, the twin engines of so much human suffering, were not invented through slow human trial and error. They were taught. They were a direct technological and cultural transfer from a higher, malevolent intelligence, and the dark curriculum continued. Other Watchers taught the secrets of sorcery, the cutting of roots for magical purposes, and the interpretation of signs. Another taught astronomy, not as a science to glorify God, but as astrology, a tool to bypass divine will and seek power from the stars. This was a full-scale assault on the natural order. These angelic kings, once tasked with guarding humanity's innocent development, were now actively reprogramming it for destruction. They They gave a civilization still in its infancy the tools of advanced warfare, the poison of witchcraft, and the arrogance of self-deification. The world that resulted was not the one God had intended. It was a dark reflection, a hybrid civilization built on a foundation of stolen knowledge and forbidden power, hurtling towards an inevitable and catastrophic judgment. The forbidden knowledge passed down by the Watchers poisoned the human soul, but the forbidden unions they pursued poisoned the very flesh. The ultimate product of their rebellion was not a new philosophy or a new technology, but a new species, a horrifying testament to their crime, written in blood and bone. The Book of Enoch calls them the giants. Genesis calls them the Nephilim. These were the children of the Watchers, the hybrid offspring of angels and human women. They were not merely tall men. They were abominations, a genetic fusion that was never meant to exist. They were demigods born into a world they were built to dominate. Enoch describes them as growing to an immense stature, possessing a strength that dwarfed any human warrior and an appetite that was truly monstrous. Their existence was an act of cosmic defiance. God had declared, "Let us make man in our image." The Watchers, in their arrogance, effectively declared, "Let us make a new man in ours." The Nephilim were the princes of this new dark dynasty, the inheritors of their father's supernatural power and their mother's mortal form. Genesis 6 tells us they became the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. But Enoch reveals a darker truth behind this fame. Their renown was built on terror. Their might was expressed through insatiable violence. He describes a horrifying spiral of consumption. First, they devoured all the produce of the land. When that was not enough, they devoured the cattle and beasts. And when all other food was gone, Enoch records with chilling simplicity, they began to devour one another and to drink the blood. This was the world before the flood. Not just a world of human sin, but a world terrorized by a predatory, cannibalistic race of giants. The violence that filled the earth was not just human crime. It was the brutal reign of these Nephilim kings. They were the ultimate expression of the Watchers' rebellion, a living, breathing pollution that defiled the very fabric of creation. Their existence was an intolerable corruption, a genetic hijacking of God's plan. And it was their presence, more than anything else, that sealed the fate of the ancient world and made the cleansing judgment of the Great Flood an absolute necessity. In a world drowning in darkness, where fallen kings reigned and their monstrous children devoured the earth, it would be easy to assume all hope was lost, that every voice had been silenced. But even in the deepest shadows, a single light can burn with defiant brightness. And in that age of cosmic despair, that light was a man named Enoch. Genesis itself gives us a brief, cryptic, but incredibly powerful summary of his life. Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. He was a man so righteous, so in tune with the divine in the midst of utter corruption, that he transcended death itself. But the book that bears his name reveals that he was not a passive monk, hiding from the world. He was an active prophet, a messenger, a man given a terrifying and unprecedented divine commission. He was chosen by God to be the human ambassador to the fallen angelic kings. The Book of Enoch describes a series of breathtaking visions where Enoch is taken into the heavens. He sees the throne of God, the celestial order, and the workings of the universe. But his mission was not just to see, it was to speak. God tasks Enoch with a message of judgment, not for humanity, but for the very watchers who had started the corruption. Imagine the sheer audacity of this mission. A mortal man, a descendant of Adam, commanded to travel to the secret places where the fallen watchers were gathered, and to look these once glorious angelic kings in the eye and pronounce their doom. He was to inform them that their prayers for mercy would be denied, that their crimes were unforgivable, and that their fate was to be bound in chains in the abyss until the final judgment. This is a stunning reversal of power. The same beings who once saw themselves as humanity's tutors, who ruled the earth as divine governors, were now being judged by a representative of the very race they had sought to corrupt. Enoch's mission was a powerful declaration from heaven that a righteous man walking in communion with God held more authority than a legion of rebellious kings. He was the living proof that the divine spark in humanity had not been extinguished. Enoch was more than just a prophet. He was the first soldier in the spiritual counterinsurgency, a testament to the fact that even when the world is dominated by giants, a single, faithful human voice, empowered by God, can shake the foundations of their dark kingdom. The story recorded in the Book of Enoch is a sprawling cosmic epic. It details the reign of angelic kings, their treasonous conspiracy, their dark curriculum, the monstrous birth of the Nephilim, and the heroic mission of a human prophet. It is a story that provides the entire, terrifying context for why the Great Flood was necessary. And yet, when we turn to the official record in the book of Genesis, this entire saga, a history that likely spanned centuries, is condensed into just 4 cryptic verses. The great kings are reduced to the sons of God. Their monstrous offspring are simply called giants. Their systematic corruption of humanity is summarized with the phrase, "The earth was filled with violence." Why? Why was this vast, detailed, and critically important history so brutally condensed? Why was the testimony of Enoch, a man so revered that the New Testament itself quotes him, effectively hidden from Genesis? The answer is not a simple conspiracy. It is a complex editorial and theological decision made by the ancient scribes and rabbis who compiled the Hebrew scriptures. Their primary mission was not to write a complete, exhaustive history of every supernatural event. Their mission was to trace a single, sacred bloodline, the covenant line from Adam through Seth to Noah to Abraham, and ultimately to the promised Messiah. From that perspective, the story of the Watchers, while historically significant, was a horrific and ultimately failed detour. It was a monstrous branch on the tree of history that, while needing to be acknowledged, was not part of the central trunk of God's redemptive plan. Including the full, sprawling account of Enoch, with its detailed angelology and cosmic tours, would have massively overshadowed the more focused, human-centric story of the Covenant. Furthermore, there was a profound theological danger. The stories of powerful, named angelic beings who interacted with humanity and fathered demigods were dangerously similar to the pagan mythologies of the surrounding nations, the stories of Zeus, Apollo, and the Titans. To prevent the people of Israel from falling into the trap of worshiping these fallen, angelic kings as gods, the scribes made a deliberate choice. They minimized their role, stripped them of their names, and reduced their story to a brief, stark warning. They didn't deny the story happened, but they chose to quarantine it. They told the what in Genesis, that a forbidden union occurred, but they sealed away the how and the who in texts like Enoch. It was a strategic act of redaction, a decision to keep the spotlight firmly on the story of God and His chosen people, leaving the dark and complex history of heaven's rulers to be a mystery that only the most dedicated seekers would uncover. The scribes who compiled Genesis may have successfully quarantined the story of the Watchers from the main biblical narrative. The Great Flood may have successfully wiped their hybrid children, the Nephilim, from the face of the earth. But the Book of Enoch reveals a chilling truth. You cannot destroy what was never meant to have a soul, and in doing so, it answers one of the most profound and disturbing questions in all of theology. What is the true origin of demons? The Bible speaks of them constantly. They are the unclean spirits Jesus casts out, the tormenting forces the apostles battled. But the canonical scriptures are strangely silent on where they came from. They are not the original fallen angels who rebelled with Lucifer. Those beings are often identified by name and rank. So who are these legions of malevolent, disembodied spirits that plague humanity? Enoch provides the horrifying answer. It is the most terrifying legacy of the Watcher's crime. In chapter 15, God speaks to Enoch and delivers the final judgment upon the giants. He declares that because they were born of both spirit, from their angelic fathers, and flesh, from their human mothers, they occupy a unique and cursed space in creation. When their physical bodies were destroyed in the flood, their spirits could not ascend to heaven, for they were not pure angels. Nor could they go to Sheol, the place of the dead, for they were not fully human. They were trapped. Enoch records God's decree. The spirits of the giants shall be concealed, and shall not rise up against the sons of men, but they shall destroy and inflict pain, and work destruction on the earth. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of men and against the women, because they have proceeded from them. This is a world-altering revelation. The demons that haunt humanity are not a third party in the cosmic war. They are the lingering, disembodied souls of the Nephilim, the restless ghosts of the giant offspring of the Watchers. This explains their nature perfectly. It explains their parasitic desire to inhabit a physical body, to possess a human vessel because they are desperate to reclaim the flesh they lost. It explains their inherent hatred for humanity, the race from which their mothers came, yet to which they can never truly belong. The Watchers themselves were bound in chains in the abyss, but their children, their monstrous legacy, were unleashed upon the world as a spiritual plague. This is the ultimate hidden truth of their fall. Their crime did not end with the flood. It merely changed its form. The war against the giants of flesh and bone was over, but the war against their demonic, spiritual remnants had just begun. A forgotten dynasty of angelic kings, a rebellion that poisoned humanity, a demonic legacy of restless giant souls. This isn't just an ancient, dusty story hidden from Genesis. It is the foundational blueprint for the spiritual war that is still raging in our world today. The actors have changed. The stage is now global, but the nature of the conflict remains exactly the same. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, gives us the modern intelligence briefing. He writes, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Notice his precise language. He doesn't just say we're fighting evil. He says we are fighting rulers, authorities, powers. These are the terms of governance, the terms of a kingdom. Paul is confirming that the war started by the Watchers, the war against illegitimate spiritual rulers seeking to dominate the earth, never ended. The original heaven's rulers may be in chains, but the demonic spirits of their children and the rebellious systems they created still hold immense influence. Where do we see this influence today? We see it in corrupt systems of power that demand absolute loyalty, mirroring the tyrannical rule of the Nephilim. We see it in ideologies that preach that man can become his own god, echoing the prideful rebellion of the Watchers themselves. We see it in a global culture obsessed with vanity, violence, and forbidden knowledge, the very dark curriculum they first taught humanity. The war is no longer fought with giant clubs and stone altars. It is fought in the halls of government, in the boardrooms of corporations, on the screens of our devices, and most importantly, in the battleground of our own hearts and minds. The goal of the enemy remains the same: to establish a counterfeit kingdom on earth, to usurp God's authority, and to enslave humanity under a system of spiritual darkness. Understanding the story of Earth's first angelic kings is not just about knowing the past. It's about recognizing the enemy in the present. It's about understanding that the chaos and corruption we see in the world is not random. It is the echo of an ancient treason, the continuing work of spiritual forces that have been fighting for control of this planet since a time before Adam. Tonight, we have journeyed back to an age before Adam. We have peered through the veil of censored history to answer the question: who were the Watchers before they fell? They were not mere angels. They were heaven's rulers, the first angelic kings of this world. We have declassified their crime, their dark curriculum, and their horrifying demonic legacy. A hidden truth so profound, it was intentionally hidden from Genesis. But this knowledge is not meant to simply shock you. It is meant to equip you. It reveals that the story of the Bible is not a quiet drama that began in a garden. It is a cosmic war for dominion that began in the heavens. And you were born onto its modern battlefield. This truth places a profound and personal choice before you. Every day, you are pledging your allegiance to one of two kingdoms. The kingdom of light, ruled by the one true king who created all things. Or the shadow kingdom of this world, still influenced by the systems of power, rebellion, and pride established by its first fallen rulers. There is no neutral ground in this ancient conflict. This is the ultimate call to action. To choose your king. To recognize that the struggles you face, the temptations, the lies, the systems of oppression, are not random noise. They are the echoes of that first rebellion. But the story does not end in defeat. It ends in victory, through the king who came not to rule with an iron fist, but to serve with a cross. If you are ready to see the world not just as a political or social landscape, but as a spiritual battlefield, then subscribe and join our fellowship. We are a community of seekers, dedicated to uncovering the truths that have been hidden. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the true nature of the war we are in. And now, we turn the final analysis over to you. In the comments below, tell us, how does understanding that the Watchers were once kings change your perspective on the spiritual powers that rule our world today? Stay awake. Choose your kingdom wisely. The ancient war is still raging,